Hey there, welcome to episode 87 of the Social Business Engine podcast. This is the podcast where I invite thought leaders from all industries who are excited to share with you, the modern business executive, how to harness social media technology in your business strategy. I'm Bernie Borges, CEO of Find and Convert and your host of the Social Business Engine podcast. Now on today's episode, you are going to meet Abby Euler, Global Marketing Evangelist for Talent Acquisition at IBM. We are going to discuss why recruiters say that they would not rehire 39% of their recent hires, and why the art and science of recruiting is really a digital marketing campaign that's made possible through strategy and social technologies. Now, this episode is in cooperation with IBM. We've published a social business journal issue together that addresses the important topic of inclusive design in a cognitive era, reinventing enterprise email to make workplaces more productive, efficient, and humane. This journal is available for download at our website at socialbusinessengine.com/journals. In other words, it's the journals page on our website. Or you can just visit the show notes page for this episode for a link to download this ungated journal. And if you're subscribed by email to get our weekly podcast updates, which we send every Friday, then this journal will show up in your inbox. And depending on when you're listening to this episode, it may already be there. And hey, if you're not subscribed to our weekly updates by email, just visit our subscribe page at our website, socialbusinessengine.com. And now, here's my interview with Abby Euler from IBM. Abby, welcome to the Social Business Engine podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Bernie.
Well, I'm excited for this conversation. And you know, Abby, you are uniquely positioned for this conversation because you lead the sales and go-to-market strategy, messaging, thought leadership, and the PR strategy for the Talent Acquisition Global Product Offering Suite at IBM. So, where I would like to begin our conversation, Abby, is this question. What is the role of the employee in the employer's brand? In other words, what impact does an employee have on the employer's brand?
So it's a really great question, and I will preface it to add an even more interesting part about my background, which is I come from consumer advertising. So my very first job and what my degree is in was working at a consumer agency. So I was a project manager, my very first job ever at an ad agency.
Okay.
Part of the reason that I came over to once what was Connexa, which is now IBM Connexa, was to start employment branding. And the reason we came over is it was about in 2005 or 6 when we started seeing marketing brands like Union Pacific shift some of their marketing dollars into what we would consider kind of employee engagement efforts. Mm-hmm. And what that really became was the employee's voice as it relates to both your external kind of consumer-facing brand and the internal brand is that they're really an ambassador. And so we use that whole premise of how do you talk to your customers, how do you talk to your employees, and make sure that your employees kind of carry the same message back out to the marketplace. So they really are your brand ambassadors, and they frankly probably tell the most authentic version of your employment brand story than perhaps even your own CEO. And I'm sorry, Bernie, I know you're a CEO, but sometimes perhaps better than your even your own C-suite can do. They are the kind of the living, breathing version of who and what your brand and culture is.
Okay. Well, Abby, I'll forgive you for offending me, but that's okay. We'll continue with this podcast in spite of that. Okay, so the employee is really an ambassador, but does the employee really think that way in the recruiting process, the whole interview process?
I think it depends on the employee, but it's been interesting over the years. In the HR space, there's been a long-winded debate, especially for those in the engagement space, around referrals. And a question that often comes up on employee engagement surveys is, would I refer someone to work at the company? And And there's two very differing schools of thought on that, which is one, if an employee says yes, that must mean they're incredibly engaged. If an employee says no, I would not refer someone, it means they're disengaged. I think an argument for why an employee potentially wouldn't refer someone is, what if you have a very strange culture? What if it's a culture that, only fits a few people? Startups tend to be like that. IBM certainly has a very specific culture. Any company that you work within has a very specific culture. And I wouldn't always say that every one of my friends would be a perfect fit for the company that, I work for. Mm-hmm. And so I think the role of the employee, depending on how they feel about your brand and your organization and the kind of employer you are, plays a huge role in the recruitment place. We still know that employee referrals are hands down the absolute and utter best way to get new and great candidates into the workforce. Because regardless of what size of that kind of debate you sit on, if an employee is taking the time out of their day to be an ambassador for your brand, to really get someone excited about coming to work at the organization, filling a job role, making sure that, they're putting their neck on the line, they're putting the company's neck on the line, and really promoting, this is the place you should work, this is the job you should have, you can probably bet that is going to be a great hire. So I would say that the employee is a paramount part of the recruitment process. And it's the reason why companies like Glassdoor have done so well. Because we live in an era of crowdsourcing. To your kind of whole premise of it's a social business world, crowdsourcing is an important part of not only the consumer experience when it comes to us purchasing and buying a brand and having a conversation with a brand. It's a huge important part of how someone goes about choosing whether or not to join an organization. I think Career Builder's last stat was most candidates are looking at 18 plus sources before they're even making a decision to apply for a job. And you can bet that one of those sources is probably going to be Glassdoor, and it's also going to be them having face-to-face conversations with somebody that they found on LinkedIn, somebody that they knew from college, somebody that they met at a conference. So your employees are absolutely brand ambassadors, and there's a lot of small startups who are offering platforms and ways for brands to use their employees as ambassador, as the assets they are, as ambassadors, to help them tell their story. So I think you're going to see more and more of employees becoming an active part of, hopefully, the recruitment process.
Okay. So this whole area of talent acquisition is actually fascinating to me. I have kind of a passion for it, even though, Abby, I live in the world of marketing. I run a digital marketing agency.
Yep.
And so, we help clients generally, do a bunch of, useful marketing things in terms of branding and lead generation and all that stuff. But in the end, they always need talent, and we are an extension of them. But yet, one thing that I've observed, and I know you have as well, is that there's actually a shortage of talent, especially in the technology world. So when companies, and I previously, one of my previous guests on the podcast was Cisco, and they talked about their recruiting strategy and how they do social recruiting. And it was a really fun episode because we were able to apply social business strategies to the process of recruiting for a 70+ thousand employee technology company where they have this constant dearth of openings, just tons and tons of openings. So all that said, what I've heard, what I've seen on your website, what I've heard from your messaging is that there's an art and science to the current recruitment process. So I'd like you to speak to that whole concept of the art and science of recruitment.
So in the simplest terms, the art, just like anyone like yourself who's been in marketing for a long time, there is just an art to marketing, and it's really around the art of messaging and the art of creative, right? There's definitely data now that we can put behind messaging and what messages to pick and what, what creative work resonates the most. But that's the art piece behind it. And there's certainly an art when it comes to recruitment of, understanding what the actual culture of an organization is and understanding how that culture is depicted in the hiring manager that you're talking to and the team that sits underneath that hiring manager and kind of understanding as you're talking to people how they may or may not potentially fit that, just from an art perspective. But then we shift into the fact that we've seen, career sites are now 100% a part of your talent acquisition strategy. If you don't have a beautiful career site that's really authentic and transparent, you're just not a part of the talent acquisition world. We have, people who are doing digital campaigns. So when we talk about email marketing, and that's certainly something we've stole, if you will, from marketing. We've taken CRMs, legacy marketing-wise customer relationship managements, we've stolen them and turned them into candidate relationship management. For us at IBM, we've talked to our friends at IBM Commerce and brought over their consumer-grade email marketing platform and marketing automation platform, so that there's not only the kind of technology science behind how you put out a great email campaign, but then there's also helping them understand, and some of our customers are bringing people with actual marketing expertise over to figure out what's the right message. Doing A/B testing, right, which is something that we do all the time in marketing to see what message resonates better, is certainly something we haven't seen in the recruitment world. And so now you've got kind of the science behind actually doing A/B testing and understanding the data that comes out of that, but then the art of picking the right message is, if you're in the oil industry, is the oil and gas message of being in this industry more important, or is it the actual brand name? And so I think those are kinds of examples of how there is definitely an art and a science, just like you'd think about it from marketing. There's the message and the creative piece, but then there's, the science behind the technology that we put behind it. And then, of course, the most scientific part of all of it, which is the assessments that are brought to the talent acquisition process. So when we're putting you through a pre-employment assessment, we're looking at what are your skills, what's your knowledge, kind of prove to me that you could potentially do this job. What are your behaviors? How do you fit in? Will you fit in culturally? And that's actual driven, science that's driven by over 25 years of IO psychology in-house consultants that we have here at IBM Connexa. But that science piece is a huge part of the talent acquisition strategy. When we think about the art and science recruitment, it's kind of all of those pieces and parts, plus together to get you at the right hire at the right time.
Okay. That was a great response, Abby. Thank you so much for that. So we've talked some about the art and science of recruitment, although I have to say I think your response was probably 80% science and 20% art. That's not a criticism, by the way. That's an observation.
Sure.
So please take it that way. And that's okay. I actually like that a lot because, we live in a digital age. So the explanation that you gave about how you stole CRM, and made it candidate relationship management, I love that. That's going to make its way into the show notes in a fun way. That's probably a tweet somewhere down the road as well.
Yep.
So talk a little bit about, you've mentioned a little bit about how the IBM Connexa product fits in here. That's social technology. So maybe can you elaborate a little bit on the role of social technology in the modern talent recruitment process?
I think, again, it runs the gamut of organizations really looking at, okay, what's our actual digital presence when it comes to recruitment? So what's our career site look like, and what's the message, and how do we weave in our employee value proposition, and how do we get, testimonials on there, to managing their Facebook page and working really closely with the marketing team to understand what's their Facebook editorial calendar and what content can we use to help bolster the recruitment message of why you'd want to work here, right? To, same thing for Twitter, same thing for LinkedIn. So there's those very obvious and basic routes to be social, right? From a conversational perspective. But then if we talk again about that candidate relationship management, where we're looking at now really robust digital email marketing campaigns, we want our talent acquisition teams to think just like a consumer marketing team would. So if you think about the last thing you purchased, right? It could be something as simple as a burrito at Chipotle over going to Qdoba, or you bought your morning coffee on the Starbucks app, and you ordered it so that you didn't even have to wait in line. What made you make those decisions? And there's definitely an engine behind that. Whether you got a text from email, or you got a message in app from Starbucks about that new order, order before and come pick it up so you don't have to wait in line. There's all these engines that drive kind of how we engage with brands, and most of it happens digitally. And when I say digital, I think you're probably of the same way. I tend to think of that in a social way, because most of our digital experiences have some sort of social built into them. Mm-hmm. And so that's the shift that we're, really hoping that talent acquisition takes on, in that you're putting out email marketing campaigns. You're using marketing automation. So when they're selecting the message within that email marketing campaign, it's then prompted to say, you selected the culture stuff, so we're going to send you a couple more emails, or maybe an SMS message around what's our culture like. You selected a job, you read something specifically about a job in an email, so we're going to prompt you to actually go directly to the site, or pick up your phone. All of our platforms are responsive, so it doesn't really matter what device you're on. It's going to be a beautiful experience for you regardless. And so I think that's a way that talent acquisition is shifting into that digital world and into that social world, where you're having real-time conversations based on behaviors, which is very much what marketing is about. It's, they have a compelling event. It drives them to actually want to then engage with your brand. In this case, the engagement is going to apply. So I think that's the biggest piece of how we're sort of stepping away from, it's not just, posting jobs on Facebook and posting jobs on Twitter, but it's getting into how do we have real-time conversations. I think Lockheed Martin is has a really interesting approach, especially when it comes to their veterans. They actually use live chat on their recruitment site under their military and veterans pages, because they found that that's a better way to convert those folks. Let's have an actual real-time conversation via chat. So I think those are some great examples of how the recruitment world is starting to move beyond just managing a Facebook page and starting to have digital, social, real-time conversations when it matters to the consumer. And in this case, the consumer is the candidate.
Right. Terrific, Abby. And you actually answered another question that I was going to ask you about personalization. So I love the fact that it really is like a marketing campaign, as you're describing here.
Yep.
If I select based on my behavior, based on my selection, based on how I engage, it's going to kind of tailor what my next message might be. Kind of
Absolutely.
So you mentioned Lockheed Martin, and I was going to ask you if you have any examples. So you've mentioned Lockheed, of brands that you're seeing that are doing this talent acquisition, in this whole CRM, candidate relationship management fashion, with some degree of success.
So I think not specifically around the CRM, but I think your question is more broader, just kind of who are kind of thinking about this recruitment as sort of marketing. So the broader sense of who's kind of taking forward steps. I think my absolute favorite example, and it's a bit dated, but it's still so wildly relevant. And when I say it's a bit dated, it's from 2004, and it's from the brand that everybody loves, or maybe some people hate, I'm not sure, but I certainly love them. It's Google. Back in 2004, they were, desperate for great talent. And obviously they're looking for talent who is going to sit and breathe and work within Silicon Valley. And so they put up a billboard on the 101, and it was a mathematical equation. And you simply typed in the website and it prompted the mathematical equation. If you solved it correctly, it prompted you to another site with another mathematical equation. And they were looking for programming skills, right? Mm-hmm. And so on and so forth. It was basically a pre-employment assessment, all done via marketing. It was certainly viral. It was certainly social. And this is back in 2004, when things we're still kind of in the infancy of
very much so,
digital, right?
Yeah.
And it was really around, if we can get you excited about this, we can get people to talk about it. But we're also going to attract people who actually can solve these problems for us, and ultimately we're going to get them to apply. That was the end goal of the campaign. That's where it lauded you out if you pass through basically all the gates. It asked you if you wanted to apply at Google, and it was a really successful campaign because it was highly targeted. It was incredibly viral, and it got them the talent that they needed, right?
Okay.
So just a really interesting way to look at talent acquisition. And certainly you can bet that that was probably driven by some marketing minds to kind of help them think through that process. Another organization that I think took a great kind of recruitment as marketing approach, and they took it from the standpoint of data, which I think is what people forget that marketing is really about now. Marketing is really driven by return on investment and data, and show me the success, and we'll fund your marketing budget more. And so marketing's not just, as you know, it's not just throwing arrows at a board and hoping that something hits a bullseye. There's a lot of data and precision now that goes behind marketing.
Way more science than art.
Right. And so Zappos took a similar kind of data-driven approach. And Mike Balin, who's their senior manager at Zappos, his biggest concern, he started with the problem. And their business problem was they really didn't feel like they were delivering quality back to their business partners, i.e. the people who they're hiring Zappos employees for, right? And they weren't able to spend quality time with candidates, and they knew they weren't delivering value. And so they looked at that as their problem, and they said, listen, we've got over 31,000 applications coming in every year. And this happens to be a story from 2014, so very topical. Of those 31,000 applications, they're only able to hire about 1.5% of those, right? So their recruiters and their talent acquisition team is spending so much time churning through applications that, of course, they're not able to deliver back any value because they don't get to spend time with any of these candidates in the way that they'd want to. So they really said, okay, of these 31,000 candidates, where are they coming from? And they found that the majority of them, or the glut of them, were coming from job boards. And they also discovered that of those, they're not what they would consider A candidates, right? They were more, B or C or D candidates, where they probably wouldn't want to spend a whole lot of time engaging with them anyways. And so their choice was, from a data perspective, to cut all job board spend. There's no more job board spending when it comes to Zappos. And what they did is they rerouted all of that freed up job board budget to redoing their career site and creating it so that creating campaigns so that it drove people to their career site. And then it asked them to become Zappos insiders. So it, asked them to start a relationship, start a, give us the interest level that you have with Zappos, and then we'll reach out to you. And so they put a lot more money into candidate relationship management, into headhunting, into that career site, so that they could really drive value back to the hiring manager, right? Let's look at less people, but let's try to look at the right people. And again, I think that is very indicative of where talent acquisition is headed.
Awesome. That's a great example. That's really a terrific example. So my last question before I kind of wrap up my key takeaways here is, if you remember, Abby, at the beginning of this podcast, when I introduced you, I shared a statistic that I think is really mind-blowing, and that is that 39% of recruiters said that they would not rehire the people that they hire. So my question, Abby, is what's your experience been in organizations that are doing recruitment as marketing, using this data-driven approach, this art and science, more science than art, to recruiting? How is that impacting that 39% stat?
Well, I think our hope is that we'll decrease it, right? And I think that the more that organizations take the onus to look at all the changes that have happened in talent acquisition, right? We've had internal skill shifts where we definitely, if we do believe that recruitment is marketing, which we obviously at IBM Connects certainly do believe that's the case, is it time to start bringing on people with marketing backgrounds? Looking at the skill shift that's happened externally, if you think about Cisco, who you brought up, they're very much like a lot of our other clients where they're saying, hey, we're in the automotive industry, but we develop apps. It's the Internet of Things, right? And cars are a part of that. And we need application development for our cars. How are we going to start recruiting out of Silicon Valley into potentially Detroit, right? So I think that the more that we start understanding some of the challenges that are ahead of us, and then actually putting strategies in place that sit outside of kind of the old ways of doing things. So instead of reactive recruitment, where a requisition comes open or somebody quits a job, we open the requisition and we try to recruit as quickly as we can. Now we're starting to push people to look at it very proactively and saying, listen, you have now the ability to create a talent community. You have the ability to take what we would consider a silver medalist or a bronze medalist from a previous job requisition, move them back over into your candidate relationship management tool, and continue having an active conversation with them because they were amazing. You just didn't have a job for them at the time. So I think we would hope to see that number start going down. And I think it's less about the assessments not working, and it's more about we're not fishing in the right pond for the talent in the first place. And so I think that's where this recruitment is marketing piece is really going to help, is how do we get really sophisticated about our sourcing tactics, right? I think for us, the excitement is what does the future hold beyond really robust CRM and really looking at, candidate analytics of, what's the behavior as they're applying and how do we make the processes seamless, but starting to look at other things that marketing does to really get down to an audience of one. And if you think about consumer purchasing. If you are on, Apple.com shopping for something and you walk into a store, there's a good chance that they're going to ping you and say, hey, you're just looking at that monitor a couple days ago. You're in store. Do you want to purchase it? Without even talking to someone, swipe your card at the kiosk, grab your lightning monitor and walk out of the store. Is there a way that we can parlay and translate that marketing into the talent acquisition world, whether it's, hey, you abandoned your job cart, we'd love to have you come back, or hey, we saw you're looking for a job on our .com, you happen to be in the store now, we have an in-store kiosk, would you love to go apply? We sure would like you to do that. I think those are the things that are going to help start shifting that number away from the 39 and closer to hopefully 20% and then 10% and then 5%, right? Mm-hmm. It's really looking at it and really believing that if the candidate is as important as we say it is, then we really do need to treat them the same way we would treat a consumer in a marketing way, right?
Yeah. Okay, so that was a terrific response. So let me make my attempt here, Abby, to summarize key takeaways from our conversation, because you've covered a lot of ground, and I've attempted to take some notes. So, and I'm going to give you carte blanche to fill in any holes when I'm done with my recap. So here we go. We started this conversation by saying that the employee is really an ambassador within a company. And you talked about how when the employee is willing to refer someone to the employer, that's really the best source of referrals. However, not all employees are willing to do that. Maybe the culture isn't the right fit, and culture is a big role. Companies like Glassdoor have done really well because of the whole crowdsourcing mindset, which candidates really have that mindset. In fact, you said that most candidates are looking at more than 18 sources for job opportunities before they even apply for a job. And you mentioned things like sources like LinkedIn, Glassdoor, and certainly word of mouth, people, etc. And we talked about the art and science of recruiting, admittedly a little more science than art, which is fine. I'm way okay with that because there's so much science available to us. You mentioned things like career sites being a big part of talent acquisition, digital marketing campaigns, redefining CRM from customer relationship management to candidate relationship management. I love that. And focusing marketing expertise on messaging and even doing A/B testing and really even the art and the science of picking the right messaging. You talked about assessments in pre-employment and looking at things like skills, knowledge, behavior, and how you and your team at IBM Connexa have more than 25 years of consultancy and expertise in those pre-employment assessments. We talked about the social technology, and that ranges from, of course, the website and the career sites to even how social media is deployed, how the messaging aligns with the deployment on social media. And then we talked about candidate relationship management, the new CRM, robust emails, providing candidates the opportunity to self-select and get personalized messaging, real-time conversations. You gave a few examples like Lockheed Martin and what they're doing with live chatting, and then what Google did back in the Stone Ages of 2004 with their math equation on the billboard and how that went viral. But it was hugely successful for them. And then, of course, in more recent times, how Zappos has taken a very data-driven approach by looking at the 31,000 applications that they had, but they were only able to hire, I think you said, 1.5% of them. Most of them were coming from job boards. They realized that a lot of them were not A candidates, so they decided, based on the data, to cut all job board spend, and then they redirected that budget toward other areas like career sites and new marketing campaigns and things like setting up Zappos Insiders and really focusing on candidate relationship management and perhaps looking at fewer people but more quality people, more A candidates. And then you kind of wrapped it up by saying that as more companies implement recruitment as marketing, then they're going to be doing things like hiring more marketing talent within talent recruiting. And instead of relying just on reactive recruiting when job openings are available, you move more towards proactive recruitment through an ongoing touch campaign through the talent community, maintaining a conversation with quality, amazing people, like you said, through, again, candidate relationship management, and really viewing the candidate as an opportunity to be an audience of one that you can communicate with just as we do in our marketing efforts. And then you even use the cart abandonment metaphor. I'll say that 3 times fast, but after I stop recording this podcast. And the whole in-store model about how candidates, when they're in the store, and I'm using air quotes on that, and then engaging with them and giving them the opportunity to come back into the store. So, I'm out of breath. Did I leave anything out in terms of takeaways from this conversation?
That was an amazing summary. The only thing that I would like to add is the one reminder that I always give to talent acquisition teams and executives is something that I learned very much in marketing, and I would guess you probably feel the same way, which is don't be afraid to fail. The one thing that's exciting about this kind of recruitment as marketing world that we're living in is it's all online, it's all digital, and it all can be tracked, which is what I loved about marketing. So you can try things, and within days and weeks, make the decision of whether that was effective or not effective. So you can try and fail and be really fast and productive and efficient to figure out and hone in on what's going to work the best for your organization. And I think talent acquisition teams are probably not encouraged to fail often, but I would say in the world that we live in, it's definitely okay to fail when it comes to recruitment as marketing, because you're going to learn something and you're going to get better from it.
So, Abby, I was going to ask you one final question. I think you just answered it, though. Seriously, I'll tell you what my final question is, and that is, what's one final message that you want to leave for my listeners that could be an actionable takeaway from this conversation? And I think you just answered it when you said, don't be afraid to fail.
Yeah.
Am I right?
I think, yeah. I mean, I've got a couple others, but if you like that one, go.
Well, go ahead. Give me one more. We're on a roll here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think so I always leave these 4 whenever I talk about it. So don't be afraid to fail is the first one. I think the second one is make friends with marketing. Talent acquisition teams who are successful, and I think back to some of the work that I did with Cabela's or Union Pacific or IKEA, when we were brokering conversations between their talent acquisition team and their marketing team, and we actually brought them together, there was a big aha moment that happened on both sides of the bench, if you will, and it made their talent acquisition end product so much better. And so marketing has so much to bring to the table, and they really can be a huge asset. And it's really about being friends with them and kind of brokering a conversation. And then the last thing that I would leave everyone with is think about your own consumer experience. Think about what you'll tolerate, what you won't tolerate. Mm-hmm. Think about your very best consumer experience and your very worst consumer experience, and then just translate and parlay that over to talent acquisition. Mm-hmm. What would you tolerate in the application process? What wouldn't you tolerate in the application process? What do you want it to look like? If you were a candidate, what would you want it to look like? How would you want to be spoken to? Do you want to have email communication constantly? Do you want to have it over the phone? So it's kind of just remember your consumer experience, because what you like is most likely going to be what your candidate wants to see.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Well, Abby, thank you so much. I'd like to ask you, where would you like to send people to learn more about you and talent acquisition stuff from IBM that we discussed here today?
Well, I would prefer you to spend more time with IBM and less time with kind of me personally. But we'd love you to go check out ibm.com/recruitment-marketing. And we have a whole host of interesting things, obviously product related. But one of my most favorite assets on there is a great video that our marketing team produced with actual testimonials from people on the streets of Boston talking about how a recruiter should woo them.
Yes.
And it's an awesome video, and I would urge you to go check it out, because I think it really sets the stage for how important this really is.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, well, that will be linked up in our show notes, and of course, my listeners know that. So, Abby, thank you so much for sharing your story here today. Recruitment is marketing. You've really provided so many awesome nuggets. So, thank you so much for joining me here today on the Social Business Engine podcast.
Bernie, it was my pleasure. Thank you.
Terrific. Well, before we sign off here, I do want to remind everyone that we have published a social business journal with IBM that addresses the topic of inclusive design in a cognitive era and how it has reinvented enterprise email to make workplaces more productive, efficient, and humane. This journal is available for an ungated download at our website at socialbusinessengine.com/journals, or just link it up right here on our show notes page for this episode. Hey, if you're subscribed by email to get our weekly podcast updates, which we send every Friday, then this journal is going to show up in your inbox. Or, again, depending on when you're listening to this, if you're listening to this in 2016 sometime, then it's already in your inbox. So, but if you're not subscribed to our weekly updates by email, then just visit our subscribe page at our website, socialbusinessengine.com. And if you're a regular listener to our podcast, first, thank you. I really appreciate you taking time to listen. If this is your first time listening to this podcast, well, thank you also. And I hope that you enjoyed it and that you'll push the subscribe button on your podcast player so that you don't miss future episodes. And if you are an iTunes subscriber, I would be very grateful if you would write a review for this podcast so that others might discover it. We have a direct link to this podcast on iTunes on our website. Just go to socialbusinessengine.com/iTunes. And lastly, I invite you to engage with me on Twitter. I am at Bernie Borges. Our podcast, Social Business Engine, is at SB Engine. And we also have a Facebook page, appropriately named facebook.com/Social Business Engine. And, of course, follow our hashtag SBE Show. Well, that's going to do it for this episode. I want to thank my guest again, Abby Euler, Global Marketing Evangelist for Talent Acquisition at IBM. This is Bernie Borges of Find and Convert, wishing you continued success on your social business journey.